The woman crouched on top of the hot air balloon, attempting to open the exhaust valve with her elbow. But at over 10,000 meters in the sky, the valve had already frozen solid, welded shut by ice. And the woman, without any protective gear, stood directly on top of the balloon. She stomped hard on the valve with her foot, pressing down repeatedly. After several tries, she finally succeeded in opening it. A cold, shuddering blast of air hit her, making her break out in goosebumps. To prevent the valve from closing again, she wedged her boot into it, then pulled out a knife to cut the laces. She quickly jammed the boot tightly into the valve's gap. But in the extreme cold and oxygen-deprived environment, she could no longer hold on. She collapsed heavily onto the balloon. With the valve now open, the balloon began to descend slowly, its volume shrinking as the cold air rushed out. This caused the unconscious woman to slide down the balloon, and suddenly, the sensation of falling jolted her awake. She fought to grab onto something, but there was nothing to hold onto, and her body tumbled uncontrollably toward the ground. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself hanging upside down at an altitude of 10,000 meters, a rope around her waist saving her life. It was better to be unconscious. Now that she was awake, fear set in. She remembered her companion in the basket and cried out for him, but James, suffering from altitude sickness, was already unconscious. It was clear she could only rely on herself. At such a high altitude, Milia began to rock her body, doing everything she could to reach the basket. After a tremendous struggle, she finally swung close enough to it. She climbed inside, but before she could catch her breath, she quickly checked on James. No matter how loudly she called, there was no response from him. Unable to hold back, she started crying. But then, a miracle happened. James slowly began to stir. As the balloon continued to descend, the temperature started to rise. Seeing the woman's hands covered in cuts and bruises, James felt incredibly guilty. If he hadn't insisted on flying higher, they wouldn't have ended up in this situation. He took out a bottle of treasured brandy and carefully disinfected the woman's hands. Oh no. Just then, snowflakes began to fall from the sky. The man quickly grabbed a bottle to collect some, but the woman soon noticed something strange. The snowflakes around them appeared to be frozen in mid-air, which meant their speed matched the fall of the snow. At this rate, they were bound to crash into the ground. The woman hurriedly closed the exhaust valve and began throwing the sandbags and life ropes from the basket. In the critical moment, the man, too, didn't care about the expensive measuring instruments. He threw them all out. But even after emptying the basket, their descent didn't slow down. In a flash of inspiration, the man urged the woman to climb onto the iron ring. He realized that the basket was the heaviest thing. He cut the ropes holding the basket with all his might, and after cutting one side, he quickly moved to the other side. Finally, they managed to throw the basket out. But even with the basket gone, they were still falling at an alarming speed.